All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, to the right of the video if you are on a larger screen. So let's see here what we got. Let me refresh this. Doesn't look like there's any new ones in there at the moment. Yeah, so no new questions at the moment. So if you got a question, now's a good time to ask. If you're just jumping on here, I'm just waiting for a question to be asked. We don't have any new questions. This question is from last week. So if you have any questions, now would be a good time. Actually, this Michael A question is not from Friday, so I can answer that. Let me. So Michael A says, I use a simulator to train practice. It would be helpful if you would post some explanations of the range metrics shown on the screen. Spin rate, smash factor, in, out versus out, in acceptable range, ball speed. I am 76 and practice daily. I would like to key in on the factors that are most important to determine if my practice sessions are helpful. Yeah, so that is so here's what I would recommend doing in your situation. What I would recommend doing is I would recommend going because TrackMan actually has a free education that you can do, and it teaches you all of that stuff. Doesn't necessarily teach you so the acceptable range is really dependent on what you're trying to do, right? So as far as into out out to in, like your club path, well, if you're trying to hit a ball that curves a ton, right? Well, the acceptable range is going to be different than a ball that you're trying to hit straight, right? So it's more about understanding, okay, if I want to hit a ball that has this amount of curve on it, right, then my face and path need to be around this area, right? So it's more about that. Spin rate again, it's dependent on what you're trying to do, right? I would say spin rate's fairly easy to understand, generally. So for driver, anything in the 2000s is going to be pretty good spin rate. For the irons, I would say a lot of it depends on, because different machines measure spin differently and things like that. But generally speaking, if you're hitting, a 7 iron, that's going to be around 7,000 spin. Can be less. It's totally fine if it's less, but it's going to be around 7,000 spin. An 8 iron is going to be around 8,000 spin. So you kind of think of it in that area. Five iron is going to be around 5,000 spin, something like that. It's really not a crazy important stat. More so with the driver and with wedges, but with your irons, it's really not going to make there's other the spin rate is going to be representative of other issues. So let's say if you're hitting a big slice, well, your spin rate is going to be high, right? If you focus on the spin rate, getting that lower, right, that's not necessarily going to fix the slice. But if you fix your slice, that's going to get the spin rate down. So here's the thing: having a TrackMan or having a launch monitor or something like that, it's something. It's really just something that's going to show you, how to, or show. It's going to show you what your ball's doing, right? You still need lessons, right? If you're not a teacher, if you don't understand everything, you're still going to need lessons to know what you need to do. So that's what I'd recommend doing, is doing lessons with an instructor. So that way you can get an idea of what you need to do, what your ball flight and contact issues are, right? So that's kind of what I would be focusing on. You probably, sometimes you get a little bit too much in the weeds. I think that, honestly, I think that the launch monitors for the average golfer, I would try to have a launch monitor that doesn't give you too much stuff, because that can get you in the weeds a little bit too much, right? Because you're looking at spin rate, you're looking at a bunch of stuff that you may not even know what it is, right? So let the if you don't plan on being an instructor or something like that, let the instructor understand those things and be able to tell you what you need to do to improve, to simplify things for you, because you can get to where you're focusing on the wrong things and things like that. So that's definitely what I would recommend. But if you want to learn about all the metrics and what all they mean and all that stuff, what spin rate is, what smash factor is, what all of that is, what I'd recommend doing is checking out TrackMan's free education. Do a Google search of TrackMan University. It is totally free. At least it was, totally free. And it's actually really well done. It's really well done. It's got videos, animations of kind of what's going on and stuff like that. It's really, really cool. So I would highly recommend that. It helps you understand basically most of what you need to know. That's what I would check out. So Mike says, I just watched a video of Clay and Mike talking about shifting your weight forward while moving your upper body backward behind the ball. How the heck do you do this? Is there an easy drill to feel to accomplish this? It's really what the stable and fluid spine is, right? So with the stable and fluid spine, right, we're going up to the top, and then we're getting our body forward while our body is staying angled away, right? So I think that a lot of people, when they shift their weight, they do it with their upper body. So they'll actually move their upper body like this. So they'll get up to the top, and then they'll try to shift their weight forward by getting their head out in front. And that does shift the weight forward, but the problem is that when you do that, you're going to tend to come over the top. So what I would try to feel like is that you're getting up to the top, you're angled away at the top, and you're shifting your weight with your legs, right? So your legs and your hips are going to go forward, right? But you're maintaining your spine angle as you're coming in. So really, it's just a stable fluid spine course. That's what you need to work through. So that's what I would recommend, stable fluid spine course. The split the center drill is a really good one. That's one where you put an alignment stick on the ground, right? So you're going to put an alignment stick on the ground. That's going to be going right through the middle of your stance. Your belt buckle is going to be ahead of it. Your nose is going to be behind it, right? Or maybe they call this the nose behind the ball drill. I think that's what it's called, right? So belt buckle in front, nose behind, right? That's where you're going to be at rest. You can see you have a nice spine angle away from the ball, away from the target, excuse me. I'm going to go up to the top of the swing. My nose is going to stay behind that. And then I'm going to shift my weight into my lead side. I'm going to keep my nose behind that. So you can see how I'm coming in and my nose is still behind that. That's what the best players are doing. What we don't want to do is where you go up to the top and now my nose is ahead of it, and then my nose gets more ahead of it, right? So that's going to tend to lead to over the top, steep swing. So that the nose behind the ball drill from the stable fluid spine course would be a really good one. So to get to that course, click the instruction tab, then click the Top Speed Golf System, then click the stable fluid spine course from there, and you'll find the nose behind the ball drill. All right, let's keep going. So that was Mike. So Bill S says, some people at the club talk about changing to low compression balls during the winter. Would this help during cold weather? I don't think so. To be honest, I think just use the same balls. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. Just use the same balls so that we can get used to the same balls. So Brant in says, especially this time of year when it's usually wet and soggy around the greens and DFW, why is the blade of my club digging in on my chip shots? This was not happening in the summer months when it was drier on the course. Can you go over how to use the hands, wrist, no wrist or chip to get the ball in the air and drop on the green with a short roll? So first of all, what you're talking about, wet, soggy conditions, the club is going to be more likely to dig, right? If it's hard and firm, the club is going to be less likely to dig. So that's why, because you really explained why, maybe without realizing it, right? So imagine sand, right? So sand, there's not a lot of resistance there, right? The club really wants to dig into the sand. That's why the sand is difficult to hit out of, right? A fairway bunker is a very difficult shot, right? It's much more difficult than hitting out of the grass because the club is much more likely to dig. And also, the ball is going to be a little bit under the sand, a little bit, just a small amount. Whereas when it's on grass, it's actually going to be sitting on top of the grass a little bit, usually, right? If you have a nice lie. So yeah, that's why the fairway bunker is much more difficult, because the ball is sitting a little bit lower, and then also because the club's going to tend to want to dig. So it's a much more difficult lie to hit out of. So what you're talking about is really just, it's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong. It's just that you have a higher degree of difficulty shot. You are hitting, you're going to have the club much more likely to dig in those situations. So here's what I would say. When you are in kind of soggy, wet conditions, what I would recommend doing is just basically typical chipping method here, right? And this is not going to be a chipping method that's going to get the ball to land and stop. When in wet conditions like that, it's near impossible. You have to have a very, very high skill level to be able to do that. So because you have to hit the ball so cleanly, because what makes the ball spin, because you're getting a ball to drop on the green and have short to no roll, that means the ball has to have a lot of spin. In order to have a lot of spin, there has to be friction. In order to be friction, there has to be clean contact with the ball. So if you're hitting off of wet, soggy conditions, that's going to be very difficult to get clean contact on the ball, because you're going to get mud and stuff on the club face. So it's just not going to be as much friction. So you kind of have to expect the ball to roll out a little bit more in these wet and sloppy conditions. That's just part of, there's certain shots that you can hit out of certain lies, right? So here's what I would do if I was in wet, soggy conditions, right? One, I would have my feet pretty close together. And this would really be the chip shot that I would use off of any. Basically, I'm in the school of thought that I'd rather use a technique that's going to be able to be used on about any lie, and I only have to make small adjustments based on kind of the lie, right? So this would be like a technique where you could do that, right? So feet pretty close together. The reason why I say feet pretty close together, club head or so apart, is that when your feet are farther apart, it promotes more of a weight shift, right? We don't really want a big weight shift for this. We want our weight to stay pretty central. So if we have our feet pretty close together, it's much easier to keep our feet pretty central, and that's going to allow you to control the bottom of the swing much better, right? If we have a big weight shift, right, shifting that way, it's much more difficult to control the bottom of the swing. You're going to tend to chunk and blade these shots, especially in the kind of the soggy, wet conditions, right? So feet, club head or so apart. Ball position, standard, I would say, is about the middle of the stance, right? So about the middle of the stance. And I like to set up a little bit open for these shots with my feet a little bit open. So my toe line would be pointing a little bit left of the target. The reason is it's just easier for me to kind of get through the shot. It's optional. It's not something you have to do, but to me, it's just easier to get through the shot, right? To keep turning through. So that's why I do it. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand somewhat close to the golf ball, right? So normally, let's say, I have a pitching wedge here, right? And let's say I'm chipping with my pitching wedge, right? I'm going to stand quite a bit closer to it than I would if I was just like a normal pitching wedge shot. This would be about how far I would stand away from it, right? But for a chip shot, I'm not standing that far away. I'm actually going to choke up on the club, and I'm going to stand quite a bit closer to it. And when you do that, what's going to happen is this toe is going to get down, right? So the heel is going to be more up in the air and the toe is going to be down. The reason why that is helpful is it's a lot easier to get this underneath the ball than the whole club. So I'm going to play it a little bit off the toe, and I'm going to have the toe a little bit more up. Right? And because of that, I am going to need to change my grip a little bit. I'm going to need to grip the club a little bit more in my hands. So standard, I'd have it a little bit in my hands, a little bit in my fingers. I'd be able to hold the club like this, right? But if I hold it like that and I'm standing this close to it, it doesn't put me in a very good position with my wrist. So it's going to be, about halfway between like a putting grip where the club's going straight through the lifeline of your hands and your normal grip, right? So that's going to look like this. So now you can see I have a fairly comfortable, it's going through my hand like this. Normally it would be like this. I have it going through like this, right? So that puts it in my hand a lot easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on turning my chest back and through. I can have a little bit of wrist hinge, right? But I don't want to have a ton, right? This is going to make things a little less consistent. And it's going to add speed, which you don't really need for this shot, right? And it may add too much shaft lean. If we get the shaft leaning too far forward, that can get the leading edge too far into the ground. And that can promote digging, right? This is going to allow us to use the bounce a little bit, right? So feet, club head or two apart, feet slightly open, staying closer to the ball. I'm going to have toe down. I'm going to grip it in my hands a little bit more. And again, I'm going to focus on my chest going back and through. And I'm just kind of returning my hands to the spot, right? And you see it's nice, clean contact. If you do that correctly, you could actually hit a little bit behind the ball and still be successful with it, right? So that's part of why I like that. I'm going to play it a little bit off the toe, just a little bit off the toe because the toe is down. That's going to help it get underneath. And I'm not going to have a ton of wrist hinge. I'm just going to focus on turning my chest back and through, right? So, and I want to hit the ground, right? I want to get this club sliding on the ground, right? Now, I don't want to do that too much. If you do it too excessively, that can be, so if I bring this back and then I hit the ground back here, of course, that's going to be a problem, right? So I'm just focusing on turning my chest back and through, and I'm just brushing the ground. And if you do that, the club will collect the ball. You'll get a nice, crisp kind of chip shot, right? So to get the spin, right, you would want to use a high lofted wedge, right? You would maybe open the face a little bit. You play the ball a little bit more forward, and you use a very similar technique, right? So again, I kind of bring it back. I might have a little bit more wrist hinge because I will probably need to hit this ball a little bit harder to give it a little bit more speed, but it would be very, very similar, right? Similar kind of motion. But again, that's a high degree of difficulty shot. So, definitely one you want to practice. So John C says, hi Q, when chipping from around the green and the ball is sitting down in the rough, what's a good technique to get ball to pop out and not roll too far? Good question. So very similar to the technique I just talked about. The only difference is you're going to need to make a couple adjustments here. So one is we want to put that ball more back in the stance. So if it's deep in the rough, we can't use that same technique because that same technique is going to have the club coming in pretty level with the ground, right? And if there's a bunch of rough around the ball, the club's just going to get caught up in the rough and you're not going to get very good contact. So what we have to do is we got to put that ball more off of the back foot, right? So that way we can have that club working more downward into the ball and missing the grass. And we may also have a little wrist hinge in there because that's also going to help you to kind of drop this club down. So the standard technique is going to be more like this, right? Not a lot of wrist hinge, club in the middle, coming in fairly level with the ball, crisp contact, right? Deep rough, I'm going to put the ball back in my stance. I'm not going to necessarily play it off the toe on this one. But I'm going to put it more back in my stance, and I'm going to kind of lift the club. And I want to kind of drop it right down behind the ball, and I want to use a lot of loft for this as well, especially if you don't want it to roll very far, because I need the loft to lift this up out of the grass. So I would use your highest lofted wedge for this, because the other reason is if it's really deep rough, you're going to need to hit the ball with some speed, right? Because otherwise it's not going to get through the grass. If you come in really, really slow, let's say I have a 5-iron, right? If you imagine if I'm trying to hit a 5-iron, you know, 10 yards or something like that, I'm not going to really be able to hit it very hard, right? And if I make that kind of swing in deep grass, the club's just going to get caught in the grass, right? So if I have a higher lofted club, I can hit the ball with more speed. It's going to get through the grass much more easily. And then I also have the loft that's going to lift it up out of the grass and hopefully get it to land softly. So again, you may even open up the face a little bit. If it's really, really thick, you may need to open up the face and really try to get this club to work underneath the ball to pop it out, almost like a bunker shot. Maybe not quite like that, but a bunker shot that you're playing back in your stance, right? So again, maybe open up the face off the back foot, high lofted club. I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to drop it down, and that ball's going to pop up out of there. All right, keep the questions coming. No problem, Brant. Glad to help. So if you're just jumping on here, I'm just waiting for more questions to be asked. So if you got your questions, now's a good time to ask them. If not, no worries. So Bill P says, for the average golfer, how often would you suggest getting new wedges due to wear? Um, it really depends on how much you play, and it also depends on um, your uh, your means. Like, because wedges are not cheap, right? We're talking for a good wedge, it's 100 and whatever dollars. I would say for an average golfer, um, I wouldn't worry about it because honestly, an average golfer um, isn't probably going to be able to tell the difference spin wise on a consistent basis from a used wedge um, to a new wedge. Um, Me personally, I played the same wedge for like almost 12 years. Um, and I noticed a difference when I got a new one, but it wasn't like I couldn't get spin with the 12-year-old wedge. So so I would say I guess never. um, Only until it just completely wears out, I guess. Um, so here's what I would say: if you can tell the difference between your old wedge and a new wedge, then that's when I would do it. If you have the means, because they are expensive, right? It's expensive. Like wedges just aren't. Um, they're more expensive than they used to be. It's like, what is a Voki now? I'm trying to remember. Let's see here. I list Voki wedges. Let's see how much a new Voki is. Oh, actually not. Oh, that one's so at Dick's. It's marked down to 150. Used to be 180. But looks like you can get new ones for 120 to get a Voki. 140, 150, 180. So, but basically, that's expensive, right? Um, so here's what I would say for an average golfer. Think about it this way: for an average golfer, for $150, let's just say that's kind of like the for a good wedge, and that's if you're going to get one wedge. By the way, if you replace, let's say you carry three wedges, right? You have let's say you got a 60, a 56, and a 52, right? And you're going to replace all of those wedges, right? We're talking, um, you know, $400 to $500, maybe more than that. So, how much is that going to improve your game versus um, getting $500 worth of lessons? I would, I would take the bet that um, I could probably get you better for $500 than a new set of wedges. So that's kind of the way I would think about it. So pros change their wedges. Some of them change them every tournament or every few tournaments. They get them for free. Like if I got wedges for free, yeah, I would change them all the time too. It's always nice to have a fresh, you know, wedge, right? It's a beautiful thing, but um, it's not. It just doesn't make that much of a difference, especially for an average golfer, your average recreational golfer, like a 15 handicap. It's just not going to make that big of a difference. But some lessons can certainly make a bigger difference, in my opinion. Bill P says, thanks. Mine are approximately 12 years old, but I don't notice a difference. Yeah, so I'd save your money. Yeah, if you don't notice a difference, then I'd save your money or get some lessons. If you're looking to get better, um, you know, I don't fault anybody for wanting to get new wedges. Like I said, it's always a beautiful thing to get a new club, right? And it whenever I get a new club, I'm like more motivated to play and practice and get better and stuff like that too. So I'm not against people getting new clubs or anything like that. Uh, so you just kind of have to. It's a tough question because it's not the same for everybody, right? Some people are, you know, if you have a lot of money that you want to spend on golf and you want some new wedges, then go for it. If you're a little bit more frugal, maybe, and you're looking to get better, I would say your dollars might be better spent. Get some lessons or something, especially if you can't tell the difference. If you're just jumping on here, I'm just waiting for questions to be asked. So if you got questions, feel free to ask. If not, no worries. I'm just working on some of my other stuff I gotta get done. So John G says Q, but I'm guessing he pushed enter a little too soon, so we'll wait for the rest of his question there. So John G says, in the backswing, do you feel the left shoulder pushing back or the right shoulder pulling back? If you're asking what I personally feel, I don't really feel they're really. It's both of those things are happening, right? So when you go up to the top of the swing, your lead shoulder is going to protract. So you can think of that as the the shoulder blade moving away from the spine. Your trail shoulder is going to retract. So that's the shoulder blade working toward the spine. Clay talks about this in the power turn course. I believe it's level 3 somewhere in there where he's talking about the protraction retraction of the shoulders. Personally, I don't feel any of that happening. It's more of, I just kind of naturally do it as I'm trying to get as big a turn as possible. But for a good shoulder turn, you're going to have a little bit of both. You're going to have some protraction of the lead shoulder and retraction of the trail shoulder. As far as what you feel, it's going to be relative to you, right? So if you're going through that power turn course, right, and you look at yourself on video and you can see, okay, my lead shoulder is protracting, but my trail shoulder is not retracting, right? I'm going up the top and I'm kind of like this, right, where my lead shoulder is kind of protracted, right? Well, then you may need to feel like your trail shoulder is retracted in order to get it to retract, because it's not just going to happen magically, right? If you're doing what comes natural to you, right, and it's not what you want to do, you're going to have to consciously think or feel something to get it to change. It's not going to happen out of nowhere, right? So that's essentially what needs to happen. So, like I said, feel is relative. What you feel and what's actually happening can be two different things. And what I would look at is what's happening on video when I do what comes natural. Okay, and if what I do naturally doesn't give me what I want, then you're going to need to actively, consciously think about doing something different in order to change it, right? So both of those things should be happening to a small degree, both of the shoulders, right, to a small degree. And if you see that you're not doing it, then you're going to need to actively try to do it and feel like you're doing it. GC, for a swing key, what would you recommend? I'm not sure what you mean. For a swing key, what would you recommend? What do you mean, John? Can you give me a little bit more context there? For a swing key, what would you recommend? I don't know what you're not sure what you're looking for, John. Start the swing. Yeah. So what I would say to start the swing, what I like is to move a little pressure into my right foot. That's what I like to do. So for me, and then again, this is kind of a to each their own thing. Not everyone needs. If you look on the PGA Tour, you're going to see all kinds of different, triggers to start the swing. But for me, I'm doing waggling, right? So if I have the ball here, I'm gonna be doing a little bit of waggling, right? So I'm visualizing, and waggling the club, and then I'm gonna look down at the ball, and then I'm gonna set the club down. And as soon as I set the club down, I'm going to move pressure into my right foot and then start my swing, right? So I'll have a little bit of a bump to my right side, right? That moves pressure into my trail foot, and I'm going to push my hip back and around. So that's how I start the swing. That may not work the best for you, or that may feel very unnatural for you. You got to kind of find your own way of starting the swing, but I like it. It feels really athletic for me. It gets pressure into the trail foot. So if you're someone who struggles with your weight shift, because it all starts from the beginning, right? If you don't start shifting your weight properly in the very beginning of the swing, most likely it's going to throw off your weight shift for the whole swing, right? So if you're getting to your trail side late, or you're moving into your lead side too early, right? Then that can kind of throw off the whole sequence. So what we want to do is we want to have a little pressure shift in the trail side. We want to get there early, and we want that to be maxing out around in this area. And as we get to the top, we want to start moving into the lead side. And then we're going to be about 50-50 in the pressure in the feet at the top of the swing. So we've moved some of that pressure back into the lead foot. And now I'm going to push in the ground and start my downswing, right? So to me, that helps me to kind of sequence the swing a little bit better. But that may not be something that you need to work on, or there may be something that works better for you to get the swing started. So it's really up to you. Excuse me. So John S says, at what point should the trail arm have the most bend? At the top of the backswing or at lead arm parallel in the downswing? They're going to actually be very, very similar. You're not going to lose a lot of bend in the trail arm. It's basically at the top of the swing, and then at lead arm parallel, it's going to be very, very similar. It's typically going to be around 90 degrees when you look at the better players. Right. So when you look at the better players, you're going to see when they get up to the top, it's typically going to be about 90 degrees. Then as they start down, right, I get to that lead arm parallel position, I'm still going to be at about that 90 degrees, and then it's going to start to straighten out. So it's kind of a trick question. It's pretty close to equal, but at the top of the swing for most golfers, that's where it's going to be the most bent. And then better golfers, you see it kind of stay bent to that lead arm parallel position. A lot of recreational golfers will actually kind of start to straighten that out very, very early, much earlier. The very start of the downswing sometimes. But yeah, if you can keep that trail arm kind of because it's very much like throwing a ball. So if I was going to throw a ball, right, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to have it about 90 degrees. It's going to stay at 90 degrees as I'm rotating open, and then I'm going to straighten it out and let it go, right? So it's very similar in the golf swing, right? I'm going to have it 90 degrees. Then I'm going to lead with my elbow. It's going to stay at 90 degrees, and then it's going to let go, right? So that's kind of the feeling that you want to have with it. All right, so we got about 10 minutes left. I do have to go right at 6, so make sure to get your questions in there if you have them. So John S says, thanks, Q. Being left handed, but golf right. That should help. I'll work on it. No problem. Glad it helps. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. If we have any more questions, if not, no worries. I do have to go right at 6, so if you have questions, please make sure to get them in there as quickly as possible, so I have a chance to answer them. If not, I'll answer them at the beginning of tomorrow's office hours. So John S says, should I err on the side of not bending the arm enough? So you're saying you should err on the side of having less bend. Generally, it's going to be about 90 degrees. So it really depends on what you're actually doing. If you're not bending your arm at all, you probably want to err on the side of bending it more, right? If you're at the top of the swing and it's like this, then you probably should feel like the arm is pretty straight, right? So it really just depends on what you're currently doing with your right arm, or it would be your hold on, so your trail arm. Sorry, for you it'd be. So you say you're playing. You golf right-handed, all right? So it would be your right arm, right? So your trail arm, if it's really bent, I try to feel like it's more straight. If it's really straight, which is not very common, but if it is, then I try to feel like you're bending it. Try to have the feeling like you're throwing a ball. So a good drill that you can do is you can kind of go get in your golf position here, almost like you're hitting a shot, and just have your right arm only, and just imagine like you're going to throw a ball in that direction. Just kind of go like this, and then you'll see intuitively. Because I think most of us, if you play in any other sports, like where you throw a ball, there's lots of sports where you throw a ball, right? You're probably throwing something in your life, right? Several times. So if you can have the feeling like, what's the most efficient way to throw this? I'm not going to have my arm like this, and I'm not going to have my arm like this. Because if I threw a ball with my arm dead straight, that's not going to be very powerful, right? If I have it really bent, that's not going to be very powerful. The most powerful position is to have it at this 90-degree angle, right? So 90 degree kind of away from your body as well. Right? So you're going to kind of open up 90 degrees up with the shoulder. That's going to be the most powerful position. That's where we want to get to with the club. So I can have that same kind of feeling with the club. I can almost, because that's essentially what we're doing. We're throwing this club into the back of the ball, right? We're throwing the shaft, right? We're throwing that club head into that. So I just want to do the same thing here. I just want to feel that same thing, right? And then if I do that, I can just take my lead arm and put it on there, and that's where I want to be, right? So that's a simple drill that you can do to help you kind of get the feeling of the correct kind of right arm position at the top. All right, 6 o'clock or 5:50 anyway. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Quick note: we will not have office hours on Thursday and Friday due to the Thanksgiving holiday. So we will have office hours tomorrow and Wednesday, though. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Talk to you next time.